Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to understand about the SQL constraint. What are these SQL constraints? Where do we use them? How do we use them? Oh, a lot of questions, right? Well, let's understand all these questions one by one. Before we get started with anything, we should have understanding of what this constraint means in SQL. Well, if we take the literal meaning of constraint, what do we understand? It's restriction. How do we apply restriction on something is by applying the rules and restrictions, right? So, same thing is applicable in SQL constraint as well. Whenever we want to apply some rules and restrictions on the data which we want to store in the columns of the database table, in that case, we can use this constraint so that we can have more control on the data we are trying to store. Like, we can have different rules as a person, but what are the different rules in case of SQL? Well, the different rules or constraint we can have on the data we want to store in the database table are all these constraints can be applied to the database table columns. Okay, and how do we exactly use this constraint? Okay, where do we use it and how do we use it? Basically, there are three ways we can apply this constraint for our database columns. First approach involves inline constraint. So in this, we use a create query, and at the end of the column data type, we apply this constraint on our column, the respective column. Second approach is different constraint line. In that case, we still use the create query, but we don't write the constraint at the end of column after data type, but instead, after we are done defining all the columns, what we do is we just separate it with a comma, and after that we write a statement. So we write constraint name, the type of constraint, and the column for which we want to apply this constraint to. Okay. And last one is, if we are having a table which is already defined, in that case I can use an alter query. Using this alter query, I can add a constraint on an existing table column. Okay, we are going to understand all these query with an example whenever we are going to understand this constraint. As we are at this topic, let's just start with the discussion of each constraint one by one. Okay, so unique constraint. Well, if we are discussing about the unique constraint, what's the opposite of unique? We are having a duplicate. Lot of duplicates, right? So, we can take an example that I want to store an passport data, and that as we know, a passport is uniquely assigned to a person. So if I just duplicate the passport number to multiple people, it's not going to be ideal scenario, right? So a passport number should be uniquely stored in a database column. To achieve this scenario, we have to use the unique constraint. Okay, let's understand this with an example. To explain the concepts of constraint, unique constraint, and to explain the example, I'm going to use an SQL editor, that is the GUI tool provided by the PostgreSQL, which is a pgadmin. Okay, let's understand all these examples in the pgadmin. I am going to use a Postgres database over here, and as you can see over here that there are no tables present in the Postgres database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table, student table, and I'm going to apply this constraint to this database table, student table. So as we have discussed that there are three approaches assigning the constraint to a column, let's just discuss all these three approaches. I'm going to right click on over here. Here you can see the query tool. I'm going to use this query tool. I'm going to write the queries, all the queries. So I've written down all the queries. Let's understand these queries one by one and understand how we can use them. So here you can see I have written down the two SQL create queries. You can see the constraint I have used. Okay, first one is this one, which is the unique. This is the inline approach. Okay, inline approach, where what I've done is at the end of this column data type, I am assigning this unique constraint. Okay. And second approach is create query as well, where I am assigning a constraint after defining all the columns. Okay. Here I have just used the constraint keyword, then the constraint name, a constraint type which is a unique in this case, and the column where I want to apply the constraint to. Okay. After this, there is this third approach, which is using the alter command. Okay, let's say that if that student table would have been already existed in the database, in that case what I can do is I can use this alter command, alter table student, and add constraint. Okay, which constraint I can give a name over here, and the type of the constraint, and the column where I want to apply this constraint. And after this, what I have done is, it's nothing, simple thing that I am preparing two records over here for testing purpose over here, okay, which contains the unique SNO value, but this S name is duplicated. Okay, and for this column only we have applied the constraint unique constraint. So if that unique constraint is working, in that case it should not allow us to store this second record, right? Let's see if it's happening or not. Okay, and also I've used this drop query. So at the end of our application understanding, example understanding, we should have reusability of student table. That's why I'm going to drop this table. Okay, let's just first comment all these queries and use the queries which is of concern for understanding them one by one. Okay, I'm going to comment all these queries first. I'm going to keep only the select query and create query. Okay, this is this uses a constraint in inline. Okay, after the end of the column, I'm going to run it. Okay, query runs successfully, and here you can see the table. Okay, let me just refresh these tables. Yeah, here you can see the student table. So here as well we can see the constraint. Here you can see student S name key. So it has given a some random name for the constraint which we have used. In a case I don't want to use that random name, I can use the different constraint line. In that case I can define the constraint name. Okay, but let's first test it out. I'm going to comment this one out. I'm going to first use this insert first. Okay, so it's able to insert the record. Here you can see the record present. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to try to insert a second record. Okay, so if you look at over here, it says duplicate key violates unique constraint. Okay, so here we can understand at least that this unique constraint is being violated because we are trying to store a record which has a S name which is duplicated. Okay, because SRW already exists in the database table. Now let's understand with the different line constraint. Okay, I'm going to comment this first one out, this one as well. I'm going to drop the table first. Okay, the table is dropped, and this. Now let's try to run this. Here you can see that I used the second different line constraint. Okay, this one. So here you can see successfully run. Let's just try to see over here if I can just see the constraint, new constraint over here. Okay, let's just expand this one in constraint. Okay, here you can see the std name. Okay, it's the name which I have given. Let's just try to test it this one. Okay, I'm going to insert first record. That record is successfully inserted. Insert the second record which contains the duplicate value. Okay, so here as well you can see that it's in duplicate constraint violation. Okay, constraint violation, unique constraint. Now let's just see the third case. I'm going to copy this query and I'm going to remove all the constraint from this. Okay, and I'm going to use this alter. So I'm creating a table without any constraint, and then using the alter query, I am going to add the constraint in the student table. Okay, query runs successfully. Here you can see. Now let's just test this one if it's working as expected. Okay, first query runs successfully. Let's try to insert a second record. Okay, here you can see, here as well we can see that the constraint violates unique constraint. Okay, So because of this, we can understand that whenever we apply unique constraint on any column in database table, that column will not allow to store any duplicate values. Okay, I have a question for you. Can we store nulls? Well, we can store nulls, but only for one time. If we try to store a null, that is or an empty value, multiple times, it still gives the unique constraint violation. Okay, second constraint is a not null constraint. As the name suggests, that it won't allow the empty values to be stored. So, but does it mean that it will not allow duplicate? No, it will allow duplicate, but it won't allow the empty values. Okay, let's just understand this with a single example. I'm going to use the same queries, but I'm going to modify these queries for our as per our constraint requirement. These are all the queries which we can use for the not. Let's see this with a simple create table with an inline constraint. Okay, before we go ahead further, I want to clarify one thing. Use of any of these methods defined on the practices which is followed on your project. Okay, it's not that using an inline constraint is bad approach and using the separate constraint line is a good approach. Okay, so use of any of these methods is based on the practices which is followed on your project. Okay, so remember that fact. Okay, now let's try to execute these queries and understand the not null constraint. Okay, query run successfully. Here you can see the successful run. Now let's try to insert a record. So now create one. Okay, I'm going to insert the first record. Okay, it allows. Now let's try to do one. First, I'm going to comment this one out. I'm going to copy this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to store only the S name. Okay, and SNO. I'm going to leave SNO empty as it is. So since I'm not providing the value for the SNO, it's going to be stored as an empty value. But since it's a not null constraint which is applied on a S name, it should throw an constraint violation error. Okay, let's see. So here we can see constraint violation, which is relation student violates not null constraint. This can just tell us that the constraint which we have applied on an S name column is working as expected. Now let's understand the third constraint, which is the primary key constraint. As we were discussing that passport should be unique for every person. Every passport uniquely identifies a single person, right? Same way, if we are having hundreds and thousands of records in a single table, how we are going to uniquely identify a record? Okay, let's say that if I were to give 100 books and I were to ask you, give me a book, and every time you bring me a book, I'm going to tell you that this is not the book I was looking for, right? So if I were to tell you that just go ahead and find the reach that code that book from that 100 books, you are going to find that book and give it to me. Like this, if I want to uniquely identify a record from the database table from the hundreds and thousands of records, in that case, apply these primary constraint for a column. Well, primary constraint is actually a combination of two constraints, we can say, unique and not. The column which is applied with this primary key constraint will not allow you to store duplicate values, as well as will not allow the empty values as well. Basically, where we use this primary key constraint is an identifier column for our database table for the records in the database table. Okay, let's understand this primary key constraint. These are all the queries for the primary key constraint. Let's understand a single query over here, which is a create query for our example. So I'm going to uncomment this one. So here you can see that I have used this constraint on our first column, which is an SNO column, because it contains the unique values only. Okay, and here as well I have changed the pkstdno, the primary key name here as well. Okay, using this primary key names is beneficial whenever we want to drop a constraint from a column. If we are having more than one constraint for a column, and if I want to just delete a single constraint for that column, we can use this constraint name to drop this constraint for a column. Okay, now let's just understand this. Okay, I'm going to execute this query. So as you can see that query is run successfully, and let's do one thing. Okay, here as well we can see that. Let me refresh this one. If I go over here and check on the constraints, here you can see student p key is primary. Okay, let's just do one thing. Now I'm going to try to store empty record as well duplicate record. To uncomment first two rows. So since we are having unique of SNO values, it should not give us any constraint violation. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this row and I'm going to just keep a duplicate SNO value. Comment first two queries. Okay. Here you can see the constraint, unique constraint violation. Okay. But we have applied a primary key constraint to that column, right? But it's giving the unique constraint violation. Now let's try to store the empty value. Comment this one out. And I'm going to change it to sname. I'm going to provide a value of some random. Okay, let's just start rew. Okay, I'm going to execute this query. And here you can see that the constraint violation is of not. Okay. So from this we can say that primary key is equals to unique key plus not null constraint. Okay, so understand this. Now let's understand the fourth constraint, which is an foreign key constraint. So databases like the PostgreSQL, Oracle database are all these databases are the relational database. Relational database means that we can have a relation between multiple tables using keys. What is this key which we can use for the establishing the relationship? Primary key and the foreign key. We can use this foreign key to establish a relationship between a first table and a second table. Let's say that I am having an address table, okay, which contains details like address, number, city and country, or only these three columns. Okay, I want to use these addresses in my student table records. How I can do that? So there is one way that I can just duplicate all these records, but it's going to be data duplication. Okay, easy approach is to relate my table to that other table record. Okay, how I can do that? Using the foreign key. So here you can see I have created an address table where I have inserted the two records. Okay, so where ADDR-NO is a primary key. Whenever we want to relate to another table using a foreign key, we have to use the primary key of that other table on. Okay, so in this case I am using an address table over here, and in the student table here you can see in the student table. So in the student table I am using this foreign key constraint. Okay, and applying it to the ADDR, but we don't have this ADDR. Okay, let's just do one. Okay, let's just create this. Here you can see we are having an ADDR-NO. We want to associate this column to the ADDR-NO column of this address table. For that, I use this constraint. Okay, I am using a different constraint line over here. So I am providing the address foreign key constraint name and the constraint which I want to apply, which is the foreign key, and the table from my student table. Okay, which is going to be associated to the address table. Now this is the line where we are associating to the other table. It's an address table. References to the table name. Other table name is ADDR, and the column from the ADDR which you want to associate is to ADDR-NO column. Okay, so this is an ADDR-NO column which is associated with the ADDR-NO values present in the address table. Let's try to run this one. Okay, I forgot to add values over here. Let's just run this one. Okay, so query runs successfully. The record which I am going to insert is going to be associated with the record of the address table which has ADDR-NO number as a 200. So this is the first record. Okay, so this is the way we can use the foreign key constraint in SQL. How we can just fetch the data? Let's say that I want to fetch the student table data as well as the respective associated record from the address table. For that we have to use the joins. Let's understand these joins in the joins video. Before that, let's just move towards the next constraint, which is a check constraint. If I want to assign some conditions on a value which I want to store in a table, how I can do that? Using the check constraint. So in the check constraint, I can use an expression which either results in the true or false. If the expression results in the true, then that value is stored. Otherwise, it throws an error, which is a constraint violation exception for the check constraint. Okay, let's just see that one. Let's just use this first query, which is correct query. Okay, let's uncomment this one and query runs successfully. Let's just try to store values. Store first value which contains an SNO which is 101. Okay, let's just execute this one. Okay, the record is inserted. Now let's just try to store a second record which contains an SNO value which is in 151. Okay, I'm going to execute this one. So here you can see that constraint is violated. Okay, which constraint? Check constraint is violated. Check constraint allows you for the conditional expressions to apply to any table column. And if that condition results in a false, then it will throw this errors like this one. If it results in true, then it will allow you to store that value. Let's understand about the last constraint for this video, which is in default constraint. Default constraint, as the name suggests, in case if we are not providing any values for a column, in that case, this default constraint will assign a default value for that column if we specify it. Okay. What do we mean by that? Let's understand this with an example. So if you look at this query here, you can see that I have used this default over here. Okay, it acts as a default constraint for this SNAME column. So in case if you are not providing any value for the SNAME column, in that case it takes a default value as a random. Okay, let's just try to execute this one and try to insert some records and check whether this default is working or not. As we can see, the query runs successfully. Now let's try to insert some records. Okay, I'm going to insert first one record where SNAME is present. Okay, so the query returns successfully. Now let's try to insert a second record where the SNAME value is absent. So if I do that here, you can see that the value which is coming when we are not specifying the SNAME is the random one. Okay, so it means that it's taking the default value. This was about the all 6 constraints in the but one last thing we are left with is how, let's say that if I define the constraint for a column and it was done mistakenly, I want to drop this constraint, how I can do that. And drop a constraint for a column, we have to use the alter query. So these are the alter commands which we can use. Okay, so here you can see that I have used it for the unique constraint and for the check constraint. Okay, in this case I'm just going to remove this constraint type and I'm going to run this first query. Okay, if we are having the constraint name, there is no need to provide the constraint type. Okay, so first query is successful. Let's refresh all the tables. Let's go to a student table and constraint. Here you can see that unique constraint is gone. So there's only the check. Here as well, as we already know the constraint name, I'm going to remove the constraint type and I'm going to run this query. So query runs successfully. If I were to refresh these tables again and check for the student table, so here I can't find any constraint, right? So this was the way we can remove all the constraints. So this was the way we can remove all the constraints from the SQL table if we want. I hope you enjoyed the video. Well, until we meet next time, bye bye.